Hey, the other month, I was browsing YouTube when I came across a video by the channel Electronimpressions. In it, he was trying to replicate certain intermetallic patterns found in meteorites. But what really caught my eye was a material he made that he called dendritic brass. As soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to make one myself. There's something about its organic, chaotic pattern that appeals to me the same way marbling, wood patterns, and chatoincine rocks do. These patterns are so inherently chaotic, but there's something almost logical about the way they exist, and of course each one is distinctly unique. To help figure out how I would actually make it, I reached out to Jason, who was one of the people that owns the Electronimpressions channel, and invited him to the StyroPyro Discord server to chat about his projects. While discussing ways to get zinc, someone suggested that I use pennies. This turned out to be a great idea, as pre-1982 pennies are mostly copper with a little bit of zinc, while modern ones are mostly zinc and a little bit of copper, giving us exactly the combination we needed. After some back and forth, a bad deal on Etsy, and a trip to the bank, we finally had the perfect source for our metal. Pennies. To prep these materials, I took an evening and sat there with a little scale and sorted the pennies by weight, as modern pennies weigh about 2.54 grams, while old weigh about 3.04 grams. And at the end of this, I was left with these two bags of copper and zinc. Of course, to make this, I would have to find a way to actually melt the metals together. And for that, there's a professor at my college doing research on bone cements, and he has a really nice furnace. So thank you again, Dr. Halawani, for letting me use your furnace. Now, we have to do some actual science. In the Electronimpressions video, he used a ratio of about 30% zinc and 70% copper. But why that ratio? Well, first what you have to understand is that what we've been calling dendritic brass is actually scientifically a repeating pattern of something called a microsegregation. And this ratio of zinc to copper allows the room temperature metal formed by this to contain both the alpha and beta alloys of brass. Alpha brass is face-centered cubic, while beta is body-centered cubic. Now, these difference in structures, specifically difference in the surface energies, allows the different alloys to be etched away at different rates, using an etchant like ferric chloride, for example, eventually forming a 3D structure that causes the light to reflect and bounce off differently, leading to the very cool pattern we can see with the naked eye. As the molten alloy begins to cool, it starts to solidify. Because we are cooling slowly, and as more energetically favorable, the liquid nucleates on the already solid bits. As crystals form, they form in the shape of their molecular base unit, which is why most crystals look the way they do. And as well as both face-centered cubic and body-centered cubic are, well, both cubic, they grow out rectangularly. Well, the reason they cool rectangularly and not cubically is because of anisotropic growth rates. The face opposing the rest of the crystal will have slightly lower surface energy, as the atoms in the solid crystal are attracting the center atoms of the structure, making that face more willing to accept new bonds and for new things to solidify on it. All of these effects are very minimal, but since we are undercooling, it gives a lot of time for these barely energetically favorable effects to start accumulating. In most metals, solidification begins with dendritic growth, but the pattern rarely survives because the liquid composition doesn't change enough during solidification, and it just homogenizes into a standard metal crystal. What makes our copper-zinc alloy different is that the copper has a higher melting point, so that means it also has the higher solidification point and wants to solidify first when being cooled. So the first solids to form is copper-rich alpha brass. As those alpha copper-rich dendrites form, they absorb a higher ratio of copper to zinc than in the surrounding liquid, slowly locally increasing the zinc concentration. Eventually, a point is reached where the zinc concentration becomes high enough that the remaining liquid now starts to solidify as zinc-rich beta brass instead. And as this alpha to beta transition occurs at a discrete composition boundary, this dendritic solidification behavior is preserved rather than homogenized. Something I didn't really understand at first is how these branches actually form and why they're so evenly spaced. Well, we know that the trunk, as I'm going to call it, mainly grows along crystallographic directions with the lowest surface energy, but some side nodes do still happen to nucleate. Eventually, the gradient in temperature will be just right that one of these side nodes can begin to take off. As it grows, it pulls in the portion around it of the solute that is ready to solidify, depleting the solute and starving out any new branches that might otherwise form. This creates a zone where no additional solidification can occur because it's more energetically favorable for this current branch to keep growing rather than a new one starting. But this is proportional to distance, and if a new branch tries to grow far enough away from this current branch, then diffusion dominates again, and then a new branch can start. Since this process is proportional and diffusion is constant, it creates a regular pattern where new branches can start forming a finite distance away, leading to the interesting, fairly regularly spaced growth. Spoiler alert, I do end up making the dendritic brass, but it certainly took a couple of tries and different methods, as I've never done this before. So this is as much a documentation of my learning as it is information for you guys to follow. So let's actually do it. The first part is getting our ratio figured out. So modern pennies are 97.5% zinc and 2.5% copper, while old pennies are 5% zinc and 95% copper. In this first run, I aimed to get roughly 32% copper. To do this, I threw together a quick little thing in Desmos and determined that I would need 2.2 old pennies for each new penny. This test was pretty imprecise as we were very time limited, so I didn't weigh anything out and just put the pennies in a graphite mold to see what happened. And what was the first result? Complete failure. During the process, we held the solution over the boiling point of zinc for way too long, so it all just boiled off. But it turned into this really interesting, fluffy, powdery stuff. Maybe this is how insulation will be made from now on. Running it back with even less time than the first try, we tried using a torch to melt everything quickly. And this was a fun little tool to use. I haven't used one of these outside of glass blowing before, and it kind of worked. There was some unmelted copper, which means our ratio is off. Even without etching, there's some visible crystalline, slightly dendritic growth structures, which is very interesting and something that we might look into in a future video. For this third attempt, I came in actually with a plan and some more time, or at least I thought. I weighed out 2 separate sets using 6 new pennies and 13 old pennies each, and a healthy amount of borax, but I don't think the borax did much. My plan was to get the 31% zinc mixture and then hold it at 815 degrees Celsius to try to dissolve some of the copper into the liquid zinc, as I saw a YouTube video where someone did this and was able to create beta brass without boiling any of the zinc off. I held the mixture at 890 degrees Celsius for about half an hour, mixing it halfway through, and then decided to increase the temperature and leave it there for a little bit longer, and then I tried pouring it out. But as I said so eloquently in this video, yeah, it's not really working at all. No. So, since I still had another one in the furnace, I increased the temp to a little over 1,000 degrees Celsius and let it melt for a couple minutes. I then was able to pour, and I actually got a pretty good glob. Sadly, some zinc did boil off and a good amount of oxides were formed, as you can see by the horrible evil yellow. But I got a pretty interesting result. This image was taken after sanding and polishing, but this was not etched. I was able to get these dendritic growths during solidification. And you could see these patterns before polishing, but it certainly made it prettier and much more satisfying. Now, I did try etching it, but it really didn't make a difference at all. I've asked around a bit, not to anyone who truly knows what they're talking about, but I have very little idea how these patterns could have formed. Maybe it has something to do with dissolved gases in the liquid solution crashing out and creating some kind of environment for these to grow. But if you have any idea, please try to let me know, because I'm very curious how this happened. At the point of this last test, it was the week before finals week, so I wouldn't be able to find the time to use the furnace. But I had gotten really invested in this project and wanted to work on it as soon as possible, so I spent $330 on this V4 furnace kiln. After about a week of planning and finals, I was able to do the last test for this video. I still really liked the idea of trying to find a way to create the brass without boiling off any zinc at all. In attempts to do this, I decided to try to ride the phase diagram. By making a mixture of copper and zinc that's biased with higher percent zinc than our target, we would be able to make a solution that liquefies copper below zinc's boiling point, since the alloy that it creates has a lower melting point than the boiling point of zinc. Then, since the liquid is not just liquid zinc, it's liquid brass, we can bring it above the boiling point of zinc and have significantly less zinc boil off than otherwise. And then I can increment the temperature and add more copper stepwise until we have our correct ratio with almost no boiling zinc at all. Okay, so let's do it. I plugged the furnace in outside on a nice rainy day. I pre-sorted out 80 old pennies and 36 modern pennies, and added all of the modern pennies to a graphite crucible. I then added this crucible along with another ingot mold into the furnace. After doing some light reading, I set the temperature to be 850 degrees Celsius. After letting it get up to temp, this took about half an hour, I gloved up and tried taking the graphite crucible out of the kiln, and that's when things started to go wrong. Now, at this temperature, the zinc should not be boiling at all, but as you can tell by all that white smoke coming out of the top, evidently it is boiling and not insignificantly. I talked with Jason about this, and according to him, his furnace also ran hot, so this is an issue you're going to have to tackle in the future. Nonetheless, I still went on, and I added 80 old pennies to this mixture. This should get us a solution that's about 42% copper, so it should be fully liquid at 850 degrees Celsius. Something I think that might have inadvertently helped us a bit is by adding the copper second that insulated all the zinc from oxygen in the atmosphere, decreasing the amount of oxides we got by a lot. After giving the copper a little bit of time to liquefy and being very productive, I went back outside to check up on it, and the zinc was billowing off even more than before. This is a good time to say that I was wearing a respirator during all these tests, as breathing in zinc oxide is very bad for you, and even in the other room that furnace was extracting into a fume hood. To counteract some of the zinc boiling, I added 5 grams of new pennies, which was a little fun. And I think my feelings about how this was going so far can be summarized succinctly as
zinc. Infinite zinc, yay!
I did get a graphite rod and poke and prod the metal mixture a bit, just to make sure that things were just not to strictly rely on diffusion to get a good mixture.
Yeah, it's pretty liquid in there. Okay, so I'm gonna pour that, I guess.
After finding a good base.
You.
I had preheated the graphite mold just because that's good practice, but also because we're going to be slow cooling this, and having it already up to temperature will allow us to do that a lot better than if it was just cold already.
Delicious.
Don't feel too bad about the fact that my glove completely covered up the pour, as it didn't really work.
That's not good.
It was sitting at 970 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes, so it kind of made sense that it didn't fully liquefy. I just decided to put it back in the kiln and increase the temperature to 1050.
Okay, so I need to turn up the temperature, I guess. That's funny.
After about 17 minutes, the kiln said it was at 1050 degrees, which probably means it was at a little higher, and the boiling zinc definitely agreed.
Yep, that's fully liquid. Okay. Let's do it. Let's roll the dice. So much zinc oxide. Oopsie. I don't know what to do with this.
So the pour was definitely a success. I missed a little bit, but it all was liquid, it all came out, and the crucible was completely clean. So I decided to put it back into the furnace and try to ramp the temperature. At this point, the kiln had been on at very high temperatures for about 2.5 hours, and everything was starting to get warm, to the point where I had to use the tool to close the front window.
Yeah, that all liquefied. Maybe to clean that out later or something. Alright, so here, this is funny. I guess I have a quenching thing here. No, I dropped it.
I decided to chuck that mispour back into the crucible and just melt it down as well to see what would happen. My problem with this furnace is that it does have temperature control in the fact that it has set points, but you can't control ramping. So how I compensated is I set it to go to a temperature for 10 minutes and then go down 10 degrees for 10 minutes and then go down 10 degrees for 10 minutes, and this should average out through thermal mass to be about 1 degree Celsius per minute. During the cooling process, I kind of got bored, so I took out that crucible with the piece of metal in it and let it solidify pretty quickly. It really didn't take long, so this did give me the useful information that it was getting close to fully solidifying, as after maybe 30 seconds of being out, I was able to tap it with a graphite rod and see that it was solid. So I just picked up the crucible, knocked it over, and the metal chunk came out. It really wasn't pretty or anything all that special, but it's a kind of cool thing to keep. So while you watch me try to figure out how to assemble this lovely backpacking chair I got using a gift card, I said earlier that I talked to Jason from Electronimpressions, and he said that his furnace, which happened to be the same model, also runs hot. Half the reason I'm making this video and future videos is to have people like you to bounce ideas off and to collaborate ideas with. Talking to people and learning from them is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm lucky to be able to have lots of interesting people to talk and bounce these ideas off. Side note, this chair was horrible to assemble. Whoever can guess the closest to how long it actually took gets lots of bonus points. So as a final step, I programmed it to cool about 70 degrees over 70 minutes to try to get that 1 degree Celsius per minute temperature ramp. Now, I cooled it to go way below what should have been the final solidification point, but because the furnace ran hot, I wasn't very confident about when that zone we talked about earlier ended, and I'd rather have more dendrites and more diffusion than no dendrites at all. So after that, I turned the furnace off and then took the ingot out to air cool as I went to go pick someone up from the airport.
Delicious zinc oxides.
Side note, the chair is much easier to take apart than put together. Eventually I just put the ingot onto this random pile of sand that happened to be there and let it chill until I came back. After coming back from the airport, ta-da! We got an ingot, and it has so many more bubbles than I thought would even be possible. I don't really know how that happened. If anyone has any ideas, I would love some suggestions to help fix that. I imagine it's just dissolved gases coming out, but we cooled slowly enough that they should have been able to bubble out the top. I tried etching it a little bit. I wasn't expecting anything, and nothing really happened. You can kind of see some grains, maybe. The real magic happened when I took it home and polished it. I am going to be mean first and tease very slightly, because this is what happened after I polished the disc from the second run. And I think this is really interesting because you can see the grains, but no dendritic brass was formed in the way we were intending, even though, again, we saw really good microsegregation structures. As we get to the end of the video, I think I have an idea about how we can try to prevent this many separate grains from forming. So here it is. Here's the ingot after etching. And here's it under electronic microscope. I don't actually know the gain of this, but we did it. You can see these really cool microsegregation patterns. It's a little sad that we cannot see this with the naked eye, but I really do think it's because so much zinc boiled off, and when we run it back in the next video, having that ratio correct, the grain size should be much bigger. Another interesting thing is that over etching is really easy. The one on the right was very lightly etched, and the one on the left was, I also would consider lightly etched. I only rubbed on ferric chloride maybe 3 times. And you can see that the features are so much blurrier than on the right. So over etching is very easy. I wanted to try to get a better surface finish and also see if the dendrite pattern made it all the way through. So I lobbed a chunk off the ingot and sanded it up to 2 kilogrit. After sanding, the surface finish was really nice, but of course we want to see what it looks like etched. And it looks pretty good. The dendrite pattern existed throughout the whole cross section, which I'm very happy about. The images up to this point were after a single etching pass, but I did a triple etch pass and the dendrite showed up much better. It's taken on this red hue, probably because so much of the zinc got etched away, leaving bare elemental copper. But you can see the dendritic pattern so much better on this ingot, and I'm, again, really happy with what we got. An interesting thing to observe is to see how the patterns look with a point source light coming from the camera. Perpendicular to the plane, you can see the dendritic structure pretty well, due to the 2 alloys having different colors. When observing a little off perpendicular, you can see the structures the best, as the light is being affected by both the 3D structure and the colors. While conversely, when viewing from long angles, the 3D structure makes the surface look uniform, as pretty much all that you are seeing is the light being reflected off the alpha brass. I'm really happy that I was able to get this effect to work. For the longest time, metal just felt impossible to deal with. I don't even know why, something about how hard and solid metal felt. But seeing that I was actually able to get it to self-arrange into these patterns was really satisfying. The next steps are going to be refining the procedure. I want to minimize how much zinc boils off, obviously, and I want to find a way for the ingot to have no bubbles. Another thing I want to try is inspired by Veritasium's recent video on jet engines. As an aside, he talked about how turbine blades are now trying to be grown as a single crystal by directionally cooling the metal through a spiral that forces only one grain to actually pass through. They do it for strength reasons, but for me, it's more about the aesthetics. In the electronimpressions video, he discovered that the samples that were slow cooled all the way had large grain sizes, which I really like and want. But the dendritic lines were blurrier because of diffusion. But I want sharp dendrites and big grains. So if I can find a way to directionally cool the brass as a single crystal, that's the biggest grain. And I can find a balance of sharpness of the lines and the scale of the features without having to factor in grain boundary size into that. And ending up with one giant grain opens up so many possibilities for art and jewelry. Anyway, this is just the beginning. And if you find this interesting, you should probably like and subscribe and do all the things. And if you have any ideas, please feel free to tell me. Thank you.